Listen, I kind of think Super Saiyan Blue sucks.
So what is this, Super Saiyan with blue hair dye?
Just going from a complete design standard point of view, if we were just to look at Goku and Vegeta in their Super Saiyan Blue forms, it's just not really the most attractive either. I mean, if we just go from the fact that, anime and manga has, their main heroes with a really cool color palette. It's always super important. They're easily recognizable. You take Goku, he's got his orange gi. You got Vegeta with the Saiyan armor. And I just think, just aesthetically, when you look at their hair, when you look at their eyes, and they're just both the exact same color, they don't stand out. As a form, it makes no sense to me. I think in terms of God scaling power, it ruins all that. And I think Super Saiyan Blue is the embodiment of Dragon Ball Super. It's very mid. And in turn, when you look at something like even foreshadowing in Dragon Ball has always had a really excellent way of foreshadowing forms quite a lot of the time. Or if it doesn't foreshadow them, at least it makes it interesting. Looking at you, Super Saiyan 3. I mean, if we go back to the original Super Saiyan form, actually, forget that. If we go back to Kaioken is a very interesting form. It's, Kinkai thought it to him. It's something that puts a strain on the body. And from a design point of view, really, really cool. It has that red aura that envelops Goku, that kind of gives that symbolism of that, he's pushing his body beyond his limits. And it has a drawback. So, every time Goku is using the Kaioken, whether it's against Vegeta, the Ginyu Force, or Frieza, we were always getting that idea that, oh crap, he's being pushed to the edges of his limits and he won't be able to maintain this for long. And it just looked super, super cool. It also even had its own audio cue. That I don't know how to describe that audio cue. It was like pew. It was super awesome. Aesthetically, its design, its drawbacks, its visual impact, I think was incredible. And of course, then you have Super Saiyan, notoriously known. Akira Toriyama made Super Saiyan, so he had to stop coloring in the hair. But the idea of a Super Saiyan being foreshadowed for quite some time on Planet Namek, particularly by Vegeta and his inheritance and the fact he's the Prince of all Saiyans, and just hearing this mythos growing up as a kid, was something that made that extremely special as well. And to the point that, what was required for it to, to become a reality, what Goku has put through at Frieza, him, what he thought killing Piccolo and actually killing Krillin, and pushing him to the edges of his limits and actually having this transformation that was, a legend amongst the Saiyans. Speaking of legends amongst the Saiyans, slightly sidetracked, the Great Ape form, the Uzaru. It's amazing. I mean, Goku in the original Dragon Ball had a tail. And, the fact that he turned into a giant ape, finally, when it came to Dragon Ball Z, Akira Toriyama decided, I better give this like a background story, rather than something that just happens. And that makes so much sense. He's an alien from another planet, and he has that transformation under the full moon. Another cool idea. A little crazy, but, it works, right? He always had a tail, kind of, revolves to more of a monkey than an ape, but nonetheless, very cool. Uzaru, I love it. Sorry, back to Super Saiyan. So, having that blonde hair, the green eyes, I'd like to compare that to Super Saiyan Blue for a second. I was the biggest fan of the original Super Saiyan, it's kind of almost like a very light yellow. The hair wasn't too banana-y, it was quite flowy Super Saiyan hair. And those, teal green eyes, particularly, and this was obviously thought out a little bit. I think originally they were supposed to be red, but nonetheless, that really works with Goku's uniform. That's a color palette that works really well with the orange and the blue as well. It makes sense, right? As a character design option, it makes sense. And also Super Saiyan, it had this multiplier. I can't remember how much multiplier that was more fandom versus how much was in the actual story, and I know none of us should ever look too much into how much power scaling works in Dragon Ball, because it will just not make sense. But nonetheless, the Super Saiyan was iconic. It took so long to get there. It was foreshadowed for so long. And the same thing again, you go with Super Saiyan 2, when we look at Gohan and the fact that he was basically a prodigy. And there was hints of him achieving it in the hyperbolic time chamber. Even greater so, the idea of Super Vegeta and Trunks, trying to take the Super Saiyan form to its most bulkiest. and the drawbacks that had. You know, they went down a wrong path. They thought that, you know, well, Trunks thought specifically that power is everything. And we see Goku remark on that in the hyperbolic time chamber.
Can beat you. I know you can beat Cell.
No, this new form has a weakness.
You know, all these transformations, you know, having some form of pros and cons and sense to it, and realizing that we better master the Super Saiyan form and control its energy output rather than, you know, try and use this form because we're going to be too slow, and if we can't hit our target, what's the point? Ultimately culminating in Gohan, you know, properly becoming, you know, there was Ascended Saiyan, but he became a Super Saiyan 2, you know, denoted by the lightning, the slightly longer hair. Also the fact that when we look at Gohan, you know, he had a Super Saiyan 1 hair and a Super Saiyan 2 hair, and they were very different. You know, again, there was a design choice there. But long live his Super Saiyan 1 hair, it's actually my favorite. So, you know, having all that, up to that point, Dragon Ball, its transformations, its origins, you know, the Saiyan race, where it comes from, it made a lot of sense to me. And when you look at Super Saiyan 3, you can start making the argument that where did that kind of come from? You know, it was off screen. Where, you know, Goku was dead after teleporting with Cell on King Kai's planet. But I do think you have to argue, though, what they did for Super Saiyan 3 in terms of its drawbacks, in terms of how cool its design is, in terms of how scary it makes Goku look, and in terms of, you know, just the hair growing again, you know, kind of, it proceeds to the previous transformations. Your hair is getting a bit longer, a bit spikier, more lightning. But what I loved about Super Saiyan 3 was a bit like Kaioken, but it was more so the fact that, more so than just pushing your body, it was the amount of energy it used. Like, that's really fun. You know what I mean? I think when people think about forms, they want the best form in inverted commas. And I think what we want as an anime viewer in our head canon is not actually what we want. We want something that has a drawback. We want something that it builds tension in a narrative of the story. And having that tension is so important. And that's why Super Saiyan 3 for me gets a solid pass for its design and its drawback. Fair enough, the foreshadowing was not there for it, but I think incredibly done. You know, I think from its design, how insane it went, and it was just super, super cool. Moving along, if I was to curve to GT/Daima for a second, Super Saiyan 4. Again, it goes back to more that Uzaru Great Ape form. The fact that it comes from that heritage, I think, is awesome. Its design is by far, let's just give it up for GT, okay? Because as far as I know, Super Saiyan 4 was not made by Akira Toriyama. Yeah, he drew it, but he didn't design it. As far as I'm aware, now correct me if I'm wrong on that, it was all down to the toy artist. I can't remember his name off the top of his head. I'll put it in the video here. Super Saiyan 4 maybe makes some of the most sense, and what I would love to have seen is if Super Saiyan 5 was kind of just a golden haired version of Super Saiyan 4. However, I do think the design of having the yellow eyes, you know, the red around the eyes, the kind of the guy liner, Goku's hair still being there in shape and form but longer again, the red fur, like everything color palette wise, that is a design masterpiece for a Dragon Ball transformation, and its origins with the tail again linking back in with that. Super Saiyan 4 almost feels like an alternate path. I don't know if anyone remembers Digimon. I think it was the second series where they could digivolve with the Digivice, or they had the eggs. This feels more like an egg transformation, you know, like a separate route. In terms of foreshadowing, fair enough, but it's, you know what, it's a transformation of the great ape Uzaru. It's like, you know, you're an Uzaru, you go Super Saiyan Uzaru, and then you have this. It's almost like that transformation path, you know, and Super Saiyan is its own thing. I could see it that way too. A lot of headcanon going on there. Which finally brings me to Super Saiyan God, which I'm not a huge fan of either, but it has a bit of a background story. You know, Battle of Gods, introducing, you know, 5 Saiyans. They have to summon Shenron. You know, 5 Saiyans, I think it was with Righteous Hearts, I can't remember. I don't know if Vegeta works for that, but I guess, the fact that it makes him more youthful, it slims him down. I do think the kind of crimson red hair isn't so bad. Again, it doesn't suit the gi he's wearing, though, you know, it doesn't suit his training outfit. You know, and then in the Broly movie, we get to see him kind of use it as a calming effect. You know, it kind of has its unique properties. So I'm kind of a fan of that. But ultimately, I still think it's the worst out of all the previous forms we mentioned. But it gets some pluses for how Shenron, you know, Beerus always thought about a Super Saiyan God. Shenron kind of tells them how to do it, that it was done once before. You know, at least they kind of tried to make lore happen. But still, I think its biggest negative is bringing the term God into it. I think when we go into the universes and gods, Dragon Ball becomes very uninteresting. I'm okay with space. I'm okay with like Namek and Frieza, but I think and other worlds, everyone's dead from their own different places. That kind of works for me. But I think when you bring in the power scaling of gods, and it really just stopped working, and it was too big. And also, let's be honest, Goku's character was assassinated in Super,
Whoa! What was that, Trunks? You put your mouth on hers. That's so weird.
Dragon Ball Z, towards the end, when he was even training Goten and Trunks and how serious he took that, and he didn't care if they hated him or whatever it was, he really was. He didn't fight for the sake of fighting if it meant putting his friends in danger. And Super, with Super Saiyan God Super Saiyan, which is the stupidest name ever. And it is the stupidest design ever. And I'm going to sound, I'm sounding like a little bit of a whiny baby here, but this is just, this is my video. It grinds my gears. Its power scaling is silly. Its aesthetic is silly. There was no foreshadowing for it at all. At least Ultra Instinct kind of had some of that, even though I have my own problems with that too. It's just on its own. It's almost like fan fiction. You know what I mean? I get the idea that God is base form and, Blue is the Super Saiyan version of it. But aesthetically, it looks way worse than Super Saiyan. It happened out of nowhere. It doesn't have really a drawback as far as I can tell for the most part. It doesn't even have the benefit of a cool design and a drawback like Super Saiyan 3, even though that didn't have foreshadowing. And Vegeta got it without getting Super Saiyan God, which kind of doesn't make sense. Did they do that whole thing off screen where 5 of them gathered around Vegeta? It probably should have had an episode dedicated to that, it just doesn't really make sense. And I think it's stupid. I think Dragon Ball Super, in that essence, has that problem, It's too grand. You look at original Dragon Ball and the fights and the tournaments and just how impressive and how much weight they had. How does a tournament between, Tien and Yamcha have so much more weight than anything Goku does in Super? You know what I mean? Or the ending of it, it's so much more tension, so much more draw, so much more intrigue, because it's just gone out the window, it's gone into the multi-universes. It's kind of like, it's this, Dragon Ball Super feels like what Marvel feels like at the moment, and I think Daima has brought it back a bit. I appreciate Daima for that, I genuinely do wish that Daima was the new canon, and I can live with that, I think it's a better show. It's only 20 episodes. Now, do I think Dragon Ball Super has amazing moments? Yes, I do. I'm not taking that away. There are individual episodes that are phenomenal, and I would say the last episode of Dragon Ball Super is maybe some of the best Dragon Ball has ever been, because it has that weight and tenacity, and Goku and Frieza fighting together. But Super Saiyan Blue is the embodiment of what is wrong with modern Dragon Ball. This was a completely unscripted video. So I appreciate you checking it out. And if you disagree with me, I love that. Sound out below. Let me know what you disagree about. And if there's parts you agree with, I'd love to hear that too. Tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why I'm right. And, do what you gotta do. I appreciate you. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for watching. And I'll catch you on the next video of whatever the hell I do. Bye. Love you, kisses.